Greetings. We're retaking our country. We're retaking our society. We are building a toolbox to do so. Short and sweet for today. What is misinformation? We hear a lot about this, another one of these terms that is used without being defined. What is it? Of course, it depends on who's using the term. The broad declarations, though, use misinformation without defining it, and then say now, because of the change in ownership at Twitter, that there is misinformation being spread on Twitter, and there are references to misinformation that was spread about COVID and all of these things. And yet, it is coming out now that there is a likelihood, possibility, greater likelihood, a possibility that the COVID originated in a lab, not in the wet market. But the media, CNN, MSNBC, the Post, Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, NPR, all of these media declared it to be from the wet market. Case closed. If you questioned that, you were a conspiracy theorist. You didn't follow the science. Is that misinformation? Since following the science means continuing to question. Following science is not receiving something from on high or from the Chinese Communist Party, and then you start repeating that declaratively as if it were a completely factually true. That's not following the science. Following the science includes examining the possibility, questioning it, checking on it, testing it, then testing it again, then testing it again. The authoritative declaration that it originated in the wet market was made and repeated and repeated and repeated by people who were not authoritatively qualified to make that statement. Was that misinformation when they were spreading it, when they were repeating it, when they were labeling people as conspiracy theorists? Having been labeled a conspiracy theorist because I questioned where COVID came from, I'm in the mix on this. But the idea, that's an example. The idea for us really to get at is misinformation itself must be defined. It must be defined. Then, as a whole different question, one we should have had before, are these social media companies effectively publishers, or are they effectively just platforms? The rules and laws apply differently. We don't have to necessarily change anything if we actually acknowledge what these platforms are, even though they are private companies. That's for the lawyers, that's for the scholars, that's for the general people to develop the details. But for those of us, all of us, we can look and say, certainly Facebook operates as a public sphere, public setting. Should Facebook be censoring? Should Facebook be controlling these things? Then who decides what misinformation gets stopped and what misinformation gets put on there? See what I did there? Because COVID declaratively did not originate in a lab, even though they said it as such. That's my view. That's arguably misinformation. Disinformation used to be a word. So, what is hate speech? I'm looking for it. What is hate speech? Define it. If you use the term, you define it. Define it. Hate is an emotion. How are outside people going to tell someone that they said something out of hate? The concept of speech being harmful and therefore being suppressed, and people can be, through governmental power, can be stopped from speaking, is a very dangerous slope. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be there in some ways at some things. But we haven't debated this. We haven't debated it. We haven't developed it. We've put in laws that say you can be, if you are saying something against a protected group. I don't actually know if you're in that protected group, if you are ever going to be charged with hate speech. See, because if you aren't, it's not the speech and it's not the hate. It's the people who are saying it who are of a certain category. Did I say slippery slope? If you're going to tell some people they can't speak because of characteristics, somebody get a history book, because you all need to review it. We need to review it. Come on, this is not the way to do it. So definitions. Define what you mean. Challenge those who are using these terms so blissfully. So that's probably not the right way to say that. So just blanketly, as if they're understood by everyone the same way. They're not. There's certainly examples of misinformation that have been on the air. Russian collusion was misinformation pushed by MSNBC, CNN, and others for years. To the point of how many people still think, and then because they won't admit that they did it, no mea culpa, they won't admit it. They then turn around and say, well, Russia does try to interfere in our elections. So yes, but Russia trying to interfere in the elections is not Russian collusion. Russian collusion was you trying to hurt Trump. Dishonestly. You made it up. Hillary Clinton's campaign, as far as I understand, because the Clintons have a long reach. As far as I understand, she paid for something that became the Steele dossier, which was used. And the FBI used it to spy on Americans, even though it was false. Americans had their constitutional rights violated by the FBI, by the government, based on falsehoods, known falsehoods. Anybody getting a little bit nervous? Anybody getting their back up a little bit? Because I don't actually care what your political views are. You are entitled to your views. I am too. So, one of our big challenges is to challenge those who use these terms and want action based on these terms when they haven't defined them. And really, they're not going to be able to define them well, because as soon as they really try to pin down that kind of definition, there are so many ways to shoot holes through it, including showing them that they're not the ones who can do it because they engage in it. How are you going to put them in charge of that? You can't, you're not qualified. You do it. So no. That's a thought for today. Son of Liberty 2020, amliberty2020 at gmail.com. Like, comment, and subscribe. Pass this along. Please, let's start getting some of these concepts together, word out, community built, so that we can be the challengers. Our country, our society needs us. Let's go.